I think the question today is, what is demand generation? Can you generate demand? And under what circumstances can or can't you generate demand?
To focus on the people that are not ready to buy, I think that's the shift. You need to focus on the people that might want to buy your product in the future and make sure that your brand is top of mind there.
There's so much time being wasted in creating shitty lead magnets. And that time could just go into creating proper assets that generate demand.
I think with the advent of search engine advertising, it was the first time ever you could come in at the end of this buyer's journey. You could come in at that last moment when someone says, I want to buy a CRM, and you could just put your ad there and you could actually target for intent.
There's not a single discipline in B2B that gets away with so much bullshit as marketers. I talked to a founder of 6 million AR a couple of weeks ago, and she was just like, yeah, I fundamentally understand marketing. By the way, this whole notion of like work for a CEO doesn't get marketing. You know why they don't get marketing? Because they worked with 10 marketing agents before, and all they did was generate fluffy bullshit that didn't work.
Okay, everybody, welcome to our first internal podcast episode.
Ooh.
Today, I am here with Joliene, one of our founding partners, and Toby, one of our partners. Welcome.
Hello, Ferdinand. And what's this show called?
Still grow with the flow.
It's Grow with the Flow, right?
Inside.
Yes.
Inside.
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 Inside or insights?
Inside.
Inside. Okay.
Syndicate sessions.
The syndicate.
Or the syndicate sessions.
Syndicate
Doesn't matter.
sessions.
Whatever we call it, I'm going to want to rename it in like 2 months anyways. So this is the insider sessions of the Growth Syndicates podcast. Doesn't matter. I think the bottom line is we have guests on, really awesome guests. We've had people like April Dunford and Wes Bush and Nathan Latka and David Arnoux and Kate Suma and so on and so forth. We've had amazing people on the podcast. We decided to do this podcast in person. So that, of course, has its challenges with getting awesome people on. We need to bring them here or, reach out to them when they're already here. And we want to produce more content. And we wanted to get an opportunity to share our thoughts on different topics. So we now think we're going to start interspersing these guest episodes.
Interspersing.
Interspersing. That's correct. I'm not going to Google it. We're going to alternate between guest episodes and internal episodes. And what we're going to do is we're going to take questions that people who listen, you, our audience, can send us specific questions, not, how do you do marketing? Specific questions. And we're going to do half-hour power sessions with 3 people from the Growth Syndicate. Today, it's 3 of us. Tomorrow, it'll be another 3. Well, not tomorrow, but in 2 weeks. And just to get the ball rolling, we've picked a topic that seems to be trending on LinkedIn right now, which is, what is demand generation?
And a topic that Ferdinand and I have been discussing vividly over Slack too much.
Yes, a lot of semantic discussions. So I think the question today is, what is demand generation? Can you generate demand? And under what circumstances can or can't you generate demand?
That's a good question. I think I always like to start this kind of conversation with a history of where how did we get here? How did we get here? Right?
How far are you going back?
So it was 2,000 years ago. In
Moses
Rome,
came down from Mount Sinai.
Came down from the Moses. Where are the leads? Where are the leads? You split the sea and asked where are the leads.
He is a jealous CEO, and thou shalt bring the leads.
God, okay. Ferdy is a historian, by the way. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of that he studied actually history.
I had no idea.
So. Well, okay. How did we get here? So I think the conversation, I think Joliene, you also presented in a couple of keynotes recently, is the whole idea of lead generation versus demand generation, right? Yeah. And at least for me personally, the way I started talking about demand generation was very much I think 5-6 years ago. It was always marketing is supposed to generate leads. That was kind of the conversation we're having. And demand generation wasn't really a thing people were aware of. And I think Chris Walker specifically kind of came out and just pushed his, really used the LinkedIn algo hard and just went on it and kind of positioned this whole narrative of we should actually generate demand instead. Right. And then it was kind of the idea of, companies have MQLs. MQLs are basically white paper downloads. And they don't convert, so let's instead generate demo requests, right? That's kind of where we came from. But I think things have matured.
And I think that there's for me another element to it. I think, and that's also what we spoke about before and also in the podcast, is there was a lot of demand to be captured because channels were not oversaturated, the market was still big enough, it was still affordable. So I think there was still demand to be captured. But I do have a feeling that nowadays everybody's online, everybody's on the same channel, everybody's spreading the same message for the same type of product. So I have the feeling that the shift has gone towards demand generation. Do you call it generation? Do you call it something else? I think that's an interesting discussion to have. But to focus on the people that are not ready to buy, I think that's the shift. You need to focus on the people that might want to buy your product in the future, not yet, are within your ICP, and make sure that your brand is top of mind there. How do you want to call it is something else.
I'm actually curious, like, when were you first exposed to the term demand gen? Like, do you guys remember when you kind of first learned it? Because for me, it was very much Chris Walker. Like, it was just on my feed every day. He had these like kind of shitty homemade videos back then still. And then that kind of whole shift took off. And I look on Google Trends, it just kind of went exponential from there. Like, when did you guys first hear about, not like when, but like in what context and what were your kind of initial reactions to that concept?
For me, it was when I was at Impraise, I think.
Pre-Chris Walker.
Yeah.
BC. Before Chris.
No, I think
Sorry.
I think there was I went first from demand capturing or lead generation to putting people in towards problem aware, solution aware, that part. And then I realized that before problem aware, there's another phase. That's people who are not aware. They might be still interesting, but at the moment they're just not relevant in the sense that they're not ready to buy. And because I was running my ads and my content and I was like, hey, I'm still missing a step. And that's where I realized, I don't know if I called it demand generation, but I called them, they were not aware. They're in the space. They are my ICP, but they don't have the ick or the problem enough to do something.
Yeah, I think there's a few different, when we talk about demand generation, one of the reasons there's so much debate is that you can unpack that into a few different debates. Right. So there's a debate, I think, generally about where should marketing teams focus. Right. And as you guys said, there are people who are actively currently buying and there are people who are not actively currently buying. And I think the reality, what Joliene just said, is that for the last, I don't know, from the early 2000s until, 4 or 5 years ago, you could get away with raising a lot of funds and just focusing on people who are actively buying. Right. Like that was a genuine strategy. And I'm writing a piece about this now, and I go back to the advent of PPC and search engine advertising. Because I think when search engine advertising, like B2C is different, right? If you run a shop and somebody comes in to look for something, you can actually target people based on intent because people come into the store and you can say, hey, are you looking to buy anything? In the digital world, that didn't really exist. And in the corporate, especially in the B2B world, that didn't really exist. Mm-hmm. So ad campaigns used to be one-to-many, big budgets, strong brand, strong messaging, strong positioning, make sure you're targeting the right kind of audience. And then there is a little bit of a pay and pray kind of element to it, where you know that if you do a radio ad or a television ad or a banner, that you're going to hit, 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 people, and a certain subset of those people are going to be actively buying, and another subset of those people will at least become aware of you for when they buy. I think with the advent of search engine advertising, it was the first time ever you could kind of come in at the end of this buyer's journey. You could come in at that last moment when someone says, I want to buy a CRM, and you could just put your ad there and you could actually target for intent. And I think that led to this kind of free-for-all on demand capture and lead gen. And so the first topic is really, I think, and this is what Chris Walker was all about, is this idea of we're all trying to capture people with intent. But when we look at people who don't have intent, we still treat it the same way. And this is where your ebooks and your white papers come in. Mm-hmm. You'd basically you put an ebook live and you'd get a bunch of signups, and marketing would treat those as MQLs the same way that they would treat a demo request as MQLs. And that's simply not the case. And I think there's that one debate which was kind of shifting people away from this lead generation, is why I prefer demand capture versus lead generation. Because people say, oh, it's, potato, but actually demand capture is capturing demand, and lead generation could be capturing demand, but it could also just be capturing noise. The other debate is around semantics. Should it be called demand generation? Can you generate demand, or are you simply positioning yourself to be top of mind when demand naturally occurs? Those are two very different debates.
Yeah, let's actually zoom in here a little bit, because you just said like lead gen versus demand capture, right? And the demand capture is like lead gen is just I want to have an email address, right? And I think a lot of the issues that we're having now when it comes to communicating marketing is that, and we have this conversation quite often, Ferdy, is that most B2B CEOs and founders are not marketeers. They're salespeople or they are product people. So, and there's actually very
Especially
few
in the B2B.
So it's always marketers always talk a big game about, how you build a business, but there's actually very few marketers who do for some reason. Yeah. And that's, I think, naturally has led to the idea where sales is very dominant, like most B2B companies are sales driven, not marketing driven, that most marketing departments are basically tasked to execute sales tactics in marketing channels, right?
Yeah, they're almost like a glorified SDR.
It's almost glorified SDR. It's basically like this idea of one-to-one versus one-to-many. Let's do the same thing, but let's do it one-to-many. And I think that's where this whole idea with white papers, ebooks originally came from as well, right? Where did it ever really, really work? If I look at kind of the efficiency of the go-to-market teams that I built, there was always things that worked better. It was just something you would do. And I think even 4 or 5 years ago, we hired an agency for just a small, experiment, a couple of $1,000 a month. And I told them, we've run this lead gen play, on LinkedIn. Like it doesn't work. Like we can generate emails all we want. We can go on Zoom Info. It's not a problem. We can get those email addresses. Like I want to kind of generate interested conversations with people that are actually interested in buying a solution. And okay, then they just suggest again and again this play of like, oh yeah, let's run a LinkedIn ad, and then they're going to download a white paper, and then we're going to nurture them with retargeting ads, and we're going to blast them with spam and everything. And I ended up firing that agency, and it was just such a bad experience because it just seemed like this play is just what marketing is. It just seemed like that's B2B marketing. We just like generate email addresses and then we spam the shit out of them.
You hit the nail on the head there, because what is B2B marketing? And I think that's quite relatively new in a sense online. I think a lot of the times, everything also, when I started in growth or marketing, whatever term you want to name it, like when we were Disbookers, which is almost 10 years ago. Yeah, I know. There was no B2B marketing. If I went to a growth meetup or to a marketing meetup, it was always B2C. The hacks were for B2C. Everything was for B2C. And nothing was focused around storytelling, ICP, messaging, that whole shebang. So I think what also happened is that we were trying to apply more B2C type of tactics onto B2B marketing, which was generating leads. And especially like in the beginning, the white papers were pretty good in the sense that it was actually something valuable, but they became shorter and shorter. And there's just a one pager that we name a white paper because hell, why not? Right. So I think also the quality just went down a lot. Yeah. But I think it's a combination of B2B marketing was starting to happen, SaaS, the startups scale-up plan started to happen. So there was a lot of untapped potential that we can tap into in the form of demand capturing. But everybody noticed that was not linear growth. At one point, it just dropped off and people were not interested. Yeah. So I think that's where we actually went back to the old way of marketing, which was brand, ICP, messaging, these kind of things. But I still have the feeling that depending on where you go, like we just had a conversation with a client where they actually asked us our opinion about gated content because they do a lot of gated content. And like, what is your opinion on gated content? And it was interesting because there's still a lot of companies that use this tactic of gated content.
Yeah, most of them. I think the problem is this, and I think that looking at the history of marketing very, very roughly in an oversimplified way, it does make a really good point, which is if you look at big B2C companies, like big FMCG corporates, whatever, and there's a lot of this semantic debate comes from people who've been 30 years in that industry. It's a completely different process, of course, right? Very often, depending on what you're selling, it's often there's impulse purchases, there's low risk purchases, but it's a volume game, right? You need to go after a really big volume, and very often you cannot rely on existing active demand to get that kind of volume, right? If you're selling, trying to think of what was cool, like when they were selling Pokemon cards, right? When Pokemon first became a thing, guess when I was born based on that, but when Pokemon cards.
That's not true, by the way. Like kids still play Pokemon these days. I was talking to a 22-year-old yesterday. He loved Pokemon cards. Like,
well, there you go. Timeless.
My friend's 5-year-old loves Pokemon cards.
There you go. I should have saved them. Might be worth something. I think the bottom line here is that the kind of volume you need to achieve to sell certain products, you need to go way beyond who's actively buying. Whereas if you're selling 50 to 100K enterprise deals, and you could target best enterprise CRM. On Google, you could get away with that when the competition wasn't massive. So I think we're all in agreement here that there's this shift happening where, most most companies did two things. They focused on capturing existing demand on the market with kind of high intent paid search. And then everything that should be focused on brand, storytelling, and what some now call demand gen, a lot of that effort was actually just put into things like ebooks because it's measurable. And I think there was this obsession with everything that's measurable. We had that, right, from about 2010 onwards. Everybody was obsessed with, what gets measured gets managed. And ebook downloads are measurable. But I agree, at the end of the day, if you have 2,000 ebook downloads, you have a cold outbound list. That's what you have. You know that they're relevant, and you know that they engage somewhat with the topics that your company engages with, but you have no indication of intent.
If they're relevant, though. A lot of times they're not. Like when we did it at Impraise in the beginning, we had a lot of HR students kind of people.
Yeah, but it comes down to the
content.
topics, right? So this is, side topic, but the first thing that every company that tries to do an SEO strategy is to do like the biggest keyword. And we made that mistake with my previous company, like what is UX? Turns out nobody buying UX software Googles what is UX. So I think that's of course a topic thing, but let's say you make very niche specific downloadable gated content. You can presume that some of these people are relevant, but that doesn't mean they have intent. They might be interested in the topic. I want to move a little bit towards the semantic discussion.
The semantics, that's more the philosophy. But I want to just the one thing you just said, I think is very underappreciated in this whole conversation, is that there's so much time being wasted in creating shitty lead magnets.
Yeah.
And that time could just go into actually creating proper assets that generate demand. And just like a 2-minute detour here, right?
Yes.
When I worked with EcoChain, our target audience was kind of corporate sustainability managers. And we ran ebook plays, but we didn't run gated ebook plays. The way we did it was actually the other way around. We kind of turned them into magazines. We focused on industries at once. And my colleague Jeff, who was kind of in between product sales and marketing, he would, who's now a founder at Carbon Equity, and he would go ahead and he would basically talk to 20 people in the liquor supply chain, so alcohol. There was kind of like a niche ICP we went for, and he would just talk to them and record the transcriptions, and we basically would map it out according to supply chain, which was kind of relevant for the ICP and that audience. And we would take those transcripts and turn them into a magazine, like a highly visually designed magazine of like the supply chain of liquor and issues and sustainability in there, right? And we just kind of took the individual pieces, and I think that those conversations were like 45 blog posts or something like that, because we kind of cut them up and we kind of positioned them in different topics. Made the ebook, highly valuable ebook, just open for free without signing up. And we also pushed it like hard from ads, right? And that thing just worked. Like we basically penetrated the entire, because it was a very niche audience, like liquor supply chains, but you have huge companies in there like Diageo and stuff, right? So, and we penetrated this entire audience very fast because we just had so many assets we would push out that would generate tens of thousands of impressions each, right? If we would have just gone ahead and said, like, hey, let's just do a bunch of research and come back with a PDF that we're going to gate and then put out, like all that, nothing of that would have happened. We would have generated like a couple of hundred email addresses, but we would have never gotten all that attention that this single play delivered organically.
No, it's almost a benchmark report.
Yeah.
And I think, and that ties in very nicely with the semantics question, because the question here, essentially what you're saying is you can create really valuable content. By the way, there are companies that do nail the lead magnet game, but I think lead magnets work when the intent for the magnet aligns with the intent for the product. So I think the company that's the best at lead magnets is Ahrefs. And look at what Ahrefs does. They offer every tool with a limit for free. You don't even have to sign up. Yeah. Backlink checker, domain rate checker. And it's amazing. And why does it work? Very simple, because the intent for the lead magnet aligns directly with the intent for the product. So if I want to check my backlinks and I only want to see the top 20, great, I get that for free. If I want to get more, I have to sign up for a paid trial, actually. Ballsy, but I love it. And then actually pay. What it comes down to, what we're essentially saying is you can create a really awesome ebook. And if people read that ebook and they say, these guys really know what they're talking about, and I have this problem and I need a solution, they're going to go and sign up. Yeah. Like there's no reason why they wouldn't. And this is why 90% of conversion rate optimization recommendations or like best practices don't apply to B2B. Ooh, make the form 10% shorter. Yeah, but if somebody can't be bothered to spend 10 seconds more on the form, how big is the pain really? That makes sense when you're selling, I don't know, candy for $5 or something. It doesn't make sense when you're selling 20,000 a year enterprise software. Like if the intent and the pain is not big enough to fill out 2 extra, I love big forms, massive filter. We do massive form as well. And it definitely kills how many people fill it out, but it really puts a bar high for people who actually have a need. So I think the key here is if people don't have intent, if there is no need, if they are not buying, you could do anything you want. That's not going to change the fact that they're not currently buying, which comes back to that semantic discussion. Because demand creation is also a term that explicitly implies that you can create demand. Demand generation is then a little bit slightly fluffy around the edges, where it's like, well, you can't really create it, but you can do something with it. And I think this is a really important one because, and I posted about this the other day, when I see these debates, people define demand gen in one of two ways. Definition number one is that basically demand occurs when somebody has a problem and starts looking to solve that problem. Not in a specific way, but any way, right? Somebody called me fat and now I'm going to start, now, I have to lose weight. I have a problem. I'm going to start looking at ways to lose weight, right? There's a million ways I could do that.
Kind of what every marketing consultant does.
Yeah, but I need to look for ways. I can look at different ways. I can look at my diet. I can try and make changes at home. I can work out. I can join a gym. I can join a football club. I can do all kinds of different things. But the problem, I become aware of the problem and I start wanting to solve it.
I want to say something about that because I believe that there's a stage in between. A lot of people experience a problem that they're not solving.
Yeah.
The problem needs to become annoying enough, like it needs to start itching before you want to actually solve
I agree, but that's not demand. So this is what I'm trying to say here is that some people define demand as becoming aware of the problem enough to want to solve it. And some people define demand as demand towards a certain type of solution, right? Those are two different. So let's imagine that you run a gym. Right, the person getting called fat makes them aware, and this is like a harsh, maybe not like a very PC example, but it's what came to mind because that's what I want to do for 2025 is do some weight. So only put onto myself, nobody else. Somebody makes a comment about my sweaters being a bit too tight, and then I become aware of the problem, right? And I start getting pushed a bit closer to wanting to solve that problem. Do I now have demand? I have demand in the sense that I want to solve this problem, but I don't know how I'm going to solve it yet. Whereas if I now decide to follow Josh Weissman's YouTube channel and I see that he's created a cookbook for people who enjoy food but want to lose weight, that's a very specific kind of solution, right? Fundamentally overhauling how I cook food for myself to stay consistent is a very different solution than joining a gym or, doing an Atkins or joining Weight Watchers. Like those are totally different kinds of solutions. So the question here, and we've seen people like Dale Harrison, for example, super smart guy, argue or imply at least that first thing where you realize you have a problem, start looking for a solution, that's when demand occurs. And then you just need to make sure that your solution is made aware of and has positive associations and seen as a strong solution. And I think there is a phase, though. There is a difference between being top of mind when that demand occurs and just being one of 20 different types of solutions, and actually making that person aware that this is the type of solution that works. And I think there are two big differences there because what you do is very different. In case A, it's just brand awareness. You just need to make sure that everybody who wants to lose weight in the next 5 years knows who you are, knows why you're great, knows why other people with similar problems go to you, and then they will come. And then if you do the right demand capture activities, you will capture them if they don't come directly to you. The second is very different because if you believe that demand is about having demand for your type of solution, the healthy foodie cookbook versus the gym, not saying that they're mutually exclusive, but let's suppose they are for a moment. That's a different set of activities because there's a market education element that is much, much more prevalent in the second than in the first.
I disagree. I feel that there's market education in both markets.
Yeah, sure.
Because I feel that if you are currently out of market, like you're not fat at the moment, I'm not talking about you, but you're not overweight and you're not overweight and you don't looking for a solution, but you are nearing your 30s. And especially as a guy, there's a probability that within the next couple of years, you gain a couple of kilos, then you still need to be educated on what the best possible solution could be.
That's what I'm saying. So you don't disagree. That's exactly what I'm saying. Educating people.
But it happens on both sides.
Yeah, I'm not talking about when it happens. I'm saying there's a big difference between saying the demand will happen and you don't control it and you just need to be top of mind when it happens versus saying the demand will happen and you cannot control when the problem occurs, but you can control what type of solutions they gravitate towards.
Yes, exactly.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
But it's also,
exactly
I think it's also good to go back to the basics here, because I think demand gen is just a horrible word, because it just it creates all that confusion, not just for us as marketers. I mean, we do this shit every day. Like, look at our clients. They're like, oh, demand gen, lead gen, I don't care. Like, marketers are just amazing at finding like new words for stuff that's already been kind of there, right? I think for like also if I look at if say the audience is maybe someone who's not so knee deep in marketing, maybe a founder, maybe someone who kind of wants to educate themselves more about marketing, I think also good to kind of take a lens back, like what was it in the past? Like, how do we call that? And before it was just, we have brand and we have activation. That's the two buckets in marketing, right? Brand and activation.
I never heard anyone talk about activation in 20 years. So you could say technically that existed, but you would not have said that.
But technically everything you're saying here is technically in those buckets, because brand was, okay, we want to not just make people aware of our brand. Like, there's the concept of, and that's something I explain to customers a lot when we talk to them, category entry points. And that's basically what you're describing as like different pain points that I have. We want to associate not just the brand with, the name, the logo, and the category. Maybe we also want to associate it with category entry points, very broadly, kind of in that early stage of the customer journey, buyer's journey, if you will, right? We want to say, okay, this is the growth syndicate. We want people, and what could be a category entry point, a trigger basically for them to look for a solution, to look for something to solve their problem, right? It could be, hey, we hired a new CCO and now we want to ramp up marketing. That could be like, and I don't know where to start. That could be a category entry point, for instance. A category entry point could be, hey, we have a huge expense on marketing, but we don't generate enough business results, right? There could be 10 different category entry points, trigger points that make me look for a solution. But us as the growth syndicate, on the brand side of things, we want to just make sure that people associate the growth syndicate with all these kind of category entry points and map it out basically for us. And then repeatedly bring that, like what we're doing right now, right? Like one category entry point could be like, I'm a founder, I'm fucking confused by all the terminology marketers throw around. I want someone to just help me and make it clear and help me get results and structure this, right? If that's a category entry point for us, could be. And then we map our brand towards that and just repeatedly build an association app, right? And then activation is just like, okay, then when the category entry point occurs, they know where to find us. They know how to get to us. They know that Ferdy is on LinkedIn. You can text me there, and we can book a call and get going. That's basically the same concept of what you just described, right? But for some reason, we've just made it much more complicated, like talking about demand gen and like MoFu, Tofu, Bofu, and everything. It's not that difficult if you think about it, right, from a marketing perspective.
I think that's where, and this comes back to what you were just saying, where I do agree, even though I don't think we disagree, I think I agree that there is this distinction here. There's a difference because making people aware of a certain type of solution is not activation necessarily. Because that can happen, because it's like what Joliene said, it can happen on both sides, right? It can happen once they're problem aware and start looking, but it can also happen before.
Yeah, but I think what Toby's trying to say is, like, if you define, for example, take the weight loss, right? I think there's different ways to solve your problem, right? You can indeed get a cookbook, you can go to the gym, you can start walking, you can download a podcast, you can start working with Georgie. So there's all these different things that you can do. But I think the most important thing is that even if you're not in the market yet for a solution or searching for a solution, that you are aware that Georgie, or and in this case, the growth syndicate, what you mentioned, can help me with all these different type of angles to my problem. And I think that's the education part.
Yeah. The question is, do you educate before the problem occurs? Or do you educate when the problem occurs? Or do you educate, because there's don't have the problem, there's have the problem, don't feel the problem. There's have the problem, feel the problem, not big enough to do something about it. And then there's have the problem, feel the problem, big enough to do something about it and actively looking. Those are nuances. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should totally revamp and rebrand the terminology of marketing, but I always wonder, because there's this kind of running narrative of, marketers, we're so good at, and I use that as well, we're so good at rebranding everything. But it also comes a little bit from the fact that, why did people have to change the word brand awareness to demand gen? It's because 9 out of 10 companies in the B2B tech space doing brand awareness were doing absolute fluffy, useless fucking bullshit, which completely trashed that word amongst the founder community. So when a founder hears brand, they're like, oh, cool, you're going to revamp the website and make it look prettier, and I'm going to have absolutely zero results.
Yeah.
And so the on the one hand, yes, it's marketers doing their marketing thing, but on the other hand, it is also just a little bit the fact that the B2B space, as Toby, you said, is not marketing driven, right? B2C is often marketing driven. The brand and the product are very hard to separate. If you take a brand like Dom Perignon, how much of that is actually product versus marketing? Because Clément will tell you can go to any champagne, anywhere in the Champagne region in France and get similar quality champagnes for a tenth of the price. So brand and product are heavily intertwined in the B2C space. In B2B, it's always been largely sales driven and product driven. And it still is today. When you go into a B2B tech company, there's a boss. It's either the CEO is a sales guy or girl, but usually when it's sales, it's very often a guy, or the CEO is a product or engineering person. Like these are the two kind of profiles that tend to drive B2B companies. And I think you need to sell what you want to do internally. Marketing is an uphill battle in a B2B company. And I think a little bit of this terminology comes from that. Yeah. So I think very often I will use demand generation simply to make the point that you should not rely only on bullshit lead generation. And then it can be very effective. Yeah. This is where it becomes a little bit complicated because that's where the semantics, they matter. They maybe shouldn't, but they do. But I think there's a big difference.
They matter because of the association.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There's not a single discipline in B2B that gets away with so much bullshit as marketers. I talked to a founder, like 6 million ARR a couple of weeks ago, and she was just like, I really I believe in marketing. I fundamentally understand marketing. And also, by the way, this whole notion of work for a CEO doesn't get marketing. You know why they don't get marketing? Because they worked with 10 marketing agencies before, and all they did was generate fluffy bullshit that didn't work. and then they just start believing it and say, give me email addresses. That's where this comes from. I've never worked with a CEO or CCO that doesn't fundamentally get what marketing is. But there's so many marketers who just burn bridges and
I think they don't understand the time lag. They
don't understand the time lag. That's true. There's a time lag. Of course, that's patience, right? And founders don't have patience. But this whole notion of work for a CEO that gets marketing, that happens because they've worked with marketers before and they've sold them fluffy bullshit.
It's the role that gets the highest turnover.
Yeah,
marketing leaders.
And I think that's the reputation. And it's a chicken and egg thing, right? Is it that marketers never got a fair chance in a B2B environment? Because I think that is true. Like in a company that is fundamentally product and sales driven, you want tangible, countable results in a short time frame. That's what you want. Sales, it's so measurable, right? How many activities, how many calls, how many turned out, how many deals won, what are the reasons for deal lost? It's as simple as that. There's a lot of bullshit in the sales world as well. I mean, let's look at all
frameworks.
The amount of time I've seen SDR, BDR, AE used interchangeably and for all kinds of different. So let's not pretend like that doesn't exist there as well.
CCO,
the same thing with product owner, product manager, product operations, product growth. It exists everywhere. But I think a lot of these semantics, it's the result of people trying to say, look, I know you associate this term with a bunch of bullshit. Why do people care about the term product manager? It's because they want to go product owners are basically backlog jockeys, right? They just shift things around on a board, whereas a product manager needs to strategically talk to customers, understand the challenges, that mini CEO idea. So product managers take pride in that role to differentiate themselves from project managers, which is what product owners, especially in Europe, have become. I think the same thing is demand generation is used to differentiate oneself from only doing lead gen. And now, when it's fresh and exciting, everyone jumps on board. But now a lot of people have just basically taken what they were doing before and just labeled it demand gen. And now that term is getting burned as well.
But that's very typical. I remember when I started, everybody wanted to be a digital marketeer. And then I interviewed a couple of people. They did one LinkedIn campaign and they called them a digital marketeer. I think it's also, and then the growth hacking as well. Yeah, I've run one experiment once on my homepage of my CTR and they call themselves a growth hacker. So I think it's also a very part of I think it's the startup scale up scene. I do fully agree with you. I've always felt the last team within a marketing team next to HR, or sometimes customer success. Yeah. You're always the team that got the least attention in that sense because you were not measurable. And then we started to measure everything, but then we realized you actually can't measure it because it takes time.
And it's again like a fine line. You should measure things. Right? There was this culture of you should measure everything, which meant that a bunch of things, I always say, just because you can't measure it doesn't mean it's not happening. Yeah. And if you admit that 80-90% of your audience is not currently buying, that's shit you can't measure. You can't measure those touch points. So if you ignore that, you are not going to be successful. But I'm seeing a counterculture on the other side of, you're trying to measure that? What are you, basic marketing bitch? And you should measure. But there's a difference between signals and results. That's maybe a different topic.
And also, the whole measurement thing, to be honest, most B2B sales organizations that are, let's say, below 100 million ARR, they don't sign that many clients on a daily basis. It's not that difficult to ask the client, like, hey, how do you hear about us? And then they're probably going to tell you. It's just like, it's not so difficult, right? I think Georgia gave us a bit of a sign in terms of timing. But one important question I want to ask you guys, because you just mentioned that you're in digital marketing, growth hacking, growth marketing. Do you guys think that the job description of the job title, demand generation marketer, will still be very prevalent or exist in 10 years?
No.
Yeah, I agree. I think marketing is going to move towards product more and more. So product marketing in that sense is going to be more and more important, and brand. I think a lot of channels are going to be highly saturated with AI and everything that's happening. I think it's way more focused around brand and product.
So maybe B2B is going back in the direction of B2C, product and marketing being very close together, product and brand being very close together. I mean, it makes sense because there is very little differentiation in products these days. So I think the job title is going to die. I mean, I don't actually see that many people with that title now.
In the US, you do.
Look, the thing is, if you're a marketer,
lead gen specialist or something that's similar to that.
That's Upwork freelancers.
again, like, I get it, right? Like, I get it. Like, from a theoretically, that's why I say like that semantic philosophical debate is very different from the practical debate. Like, I get that you don't want to call yourself a digital marketer on LinkedIn. Like, that just sounds like, that you just did a 20-year career in Cisco or something. Like, like I get that that's not what you want to call yourself. And I also get that you don't want to call yourself a brand marketer, because the amount of brand marketers I've worked with where it was just like spending two hours a week adjusting font sizes. Like, I think I get the want to differentiate oneself, but I think we need to just have much deeper discussions about these conversations like we had here. I think the bottom line is the days of only capturing existing demand, focusing only on people actively buying, those days are over. And understanding how the people who aren't buying might buy is crucial to deciding the content, the positioning, the messaging, the channels, the tactics. They need to be built much more around the people who aren't buying than around the people who are actively buying.
That I agree. One last thing I would like to say, I do feel that we also live in our own bubble. Like, we work with startups and scale-ups and sometimes, of course, a couple of bigger companies. But in the corporate world, you do have communication managers and you do have all these type of roles that we deem less relevant or don't find it as fun. But yeah, I do feel that there's a difference between the techie, nerdy world that's changing very rapidly and the old school marketing that's still very much prevalent.
I agree. Yeah.
Cool.
What do you think, Toby? Last words. You asked the last question. You give the last words.
Yeah, no, I think I have nothing to add here. I think that's kind of what I look at it too. And I think it's what you just said, Joliene. I think context is so much in marketing. And if you see people, I wrote about that on LinkedIn the other day, like, it's context is everything. Like, the same role in a 1 million ARR company versus like a 2 billion ARR company is completely different. And people are just giving blind advice, but this is going to work everywhere. It's just like not going to work. I got a bunch of shit from people because I said CEOs shouldn't write on LinkedIn, but I was referring to companies with actually like significant size, and not where the CEO is like a 5-people marketing agency.
There's nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with it, but the CEO of 5-people marketing agency probably should write themselves on LinkedIn, right? Whereas the CEO of like a 500 FTE company maybe shouldn't. And then the CEO of Databox came back to me and said like, I still do it. I was like, okay, cool. You're a marketer. But yeah, I think it's context is everything, and some of those roles have merit. But demand gen per se itself, I think it might just go back to the basics and vanish.
Here. That's it.
Cool. Is there any like call to action at the end? We're doing this for the first time. Follow us on.
Download our ebook. Links in the comments. How to do or not do demand generation.
Yeah, and then
I might actually make a gated ebook just for the sake of it.
And we're gonna retarget the hell out of you and send you a bunch of emails.
Yeah.
And events. We have a couple of cool events coming up. Meetups if you want to join.
I don't know them off the top of my head, but like sign up to the Substack.
Yeah.
Substack. We push our updates through there, and follow us on LinkedIn. And
we do have monthly events. I think that's good to say. Like starting January 2025, gonna have monthly meetups organized by our wonderful Georgie.
In Amsterdam. For now.
Georgie.
For everyone in B2B marketing growth.
Bring back the old days. No more selling, just fun and pizza.
Just lead generation.
Pure hardcore lead gen. Okay.
Cool. That's it. Thank you. See you in the next one.
you.